All right, let's jump right in. Today, we're tackling 19th century Europe, and we've got a whole pile of sources to sift through, from Napoleon to the Industrial Revolution. Should be a wild ride.
Oh, absolutely. This century was a real turning point. Larger than life personalities, revolutions, massive social changes. We're going to uncover some fascinating stuff.
I'm especially curious about the contradictions we'll find. Like, think about Napoleon's supposed Enlightenment ideals, right next to some pretty questionable actions.
Yeah, that's a great example. Napoleon's a perfect place to start, actually. I mean, most people know the basics, the meritocratic system, the Napoleonic Code, championing those Enlightenment ideals.
Yeah, textbook stuff.
But did you know he was also kind of a hypocrite, like putting his family members in charge of conquered territories?
Wait, seriously? The guy who built his whole empire on promoting skill was playing favorites.
It's wild, right? Totally contradicts his meritocratic principles. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. He was all about religious tolerance, but then forced French culture and language onto everyone he conquered, made them basically mini Francis.
Huh. Talk about mixed messages. It's like he cherry-picked which Enlightenment ideals to follow, depending on what was convenient.
Exactly. And get this, to make sure his heirs had a royal lineage, he committed his wife Josephine to an asylum,
Whoa.
divorced her, and married a much younger woman from Austrian royalty, all to secure a dynasty.
Wow. It's a reminder that even the most brilliant figures have their flaws. It really makes you see Napoleon in a whole new light.
For sure, history's rarely black and white. Even the people who champion progressive ideas can act in ways that contradict those very ideals. It's complicated.
Speaking of complicated, let's move on to Romanticism.
Yeah.
It emerged as a direct response to the Enlightenment's focus on reason and logic, right?
Yeah, imagine a world obsessed with logic and rationality. Then, bam, a whole new wave of artists and writers come along embracing emotion, intuition, and the power of nature.
It's a complete 180. So how did this play out in Romantic art? Give me some examples.
Okay, picture this. Caspar David Friedrich's painting, Wanderer Above the Sea of Fog. It's this lone figure gazing out at a vast mystical landscape. It captures that romantic fascination with nature's power.
I can almost feel the awe and wonder just thinking about it. So different from the restrained classical art of the Enlightenment.
Right. Or how about Eugene Delacroix's Liberty Leading the People? It glorifies the French Revolution's fight for freedom, a major theme in Romantic art.
It's interesting how Romantic art often depicted these dramatic scenes, full of movement and emotion.
Totally. And don't forget about literature. Tennyson's poem Ulysses perfectly embodies the romantic rejection of a quiet life. Ulysses, this aging hero, refuses to retire peacefully. Instead, he sets sail for one last adventure. He embraces struggle and the unknown, literally until his dying breath.
Sounds like the Romantics were all about living life to the fullest. Passion and intensity over reason and restraint.
Absolutely. While the Enlightenment emphasized logic and order, the Romantics were all about feeling, imagination, and the unique experience of the individual.
Fascinating stuff. So while this artistic revolution was happening, Britain was undergoing a very different kind of transformation, the Industrial Revolution. Why was Britain the leader in this era of technological advancement? What set them apart?
Well, there are a few key factors. First, they had tons of natural resources, like coal and iron, crucial for powering those new factories and machines.
Yeah, the fuels for the fire.
Exactly. But they also had this entrepreneurial spirit, encouraging innovation and risk-taking. Plus, the British government was really supportive of industrial growth. And they had a vast empire, ready-made markets for their manufactured goods.
So it was the perfect storm. Resources, innovation, government support, and a built-in customer base. But this industrialization also led to rapid urbanization, right? Cities exploding with people.
Absolutely. People flocked to cities for work, which led to overcrowding, poor sanitation, and all sorts of social problems. The dark side of progress, you could say.
A bit of a double-edged sword. Amazing technological advances on one hand, harsh living conditions, and social upheaval on the other.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And out of these struggles came new ideas about how society should be organized, particularly the idea of socialism.
Right. And we have sources on both utopian socialism and Marxist socialism. What are the main differences?
Okay, so utopian socialists like Robert Owen believed a more just and equitable society could be achieved peacefully through the goodwill of the wealthy.
Appealing to their better nature. So they thought if the wealthy saw the suffering of the poor, they'd voluntarily share their wealth.
Yeah, something like that. Owen, for example, set up this model textile mill in Scotland called New Lanark. He provided workers with decent housing, education, healthcare, even a park. unheard of in most factories back then.
Sounds pretty idyllic compared to the typical factory.
It was pretty revolutionary for its time. But then you have Marxist socialists. They saw capitalism as inherently exploitative. They believed the working class, the proletariat, would eventually rise up and overthrow the capitalist class, the bourgeoisie, leading to a classless society.
So a complete system overhaul. Utopian socialists wanted to reform the system from within, while Marxists were calling for a revolution.
Exactly. Marx believed class struggle was the driving force of history. He thought a violent overthrow of the capitalist system was inevitable.
So two very different visions of socialism coming out of the same conditions. It's interesting how one's all about peaceful reform and the other's predicting a violent revolution.
Yeah, it really shows you the anxieties and the conflicting ideas floating around during this time of huge change. Some people clung to that hope of a peaceful transition to a more just society, but others just saw a revolution as the only way to get true equality.
And while these ideological battles were raging, the balance of power in Europe was shifting dramatically, especially with the Crimean War. Can you break down the who, the why, the winners, and the effects of this conflict for us?
The Crimean War was a weird one, for sure. It was Britain, France, and the Ottoman Empire against Russia. Pretty odd alliance, right? But what brought them together was their fear of Russia getting too powerful.
So it was less about loyalty and more about keeping Russia in check.
Exactly. The war itself was a mess. Incompetence on both sides, terrible conditions for the soldiers. In the end, Russia lost, and it really exposed their military weaknesses.
What about the lasting consequences? Did it change the whole geopolitical landscape of Europe?
Oh, absolutely. It marked the end of that post-Napoleonic era of peace, and it forced Russia to face the fact that they needed to modernize. They couldn't compete with the industrialized powers of Western Europe with their outdated military tactics and a mostly agrarian economy.
So their defeat actually pushed them toward reform and modernization.
It's funny how that works sometimes. A big loss can be the kick in the pants you need to make changes.
And on the topic of change, this war also saw the rise of modern battlefield nursing, thanks to Florence Nightingale.
Yeah, Nightingale's work was huge, improving sanitation, providing compassionate care to wounded soldiers. It revolutionized nursing and had a lasting impact on medical practices.
It's kind of amazing to see progress and compassion coming out of such a brutal conflict. But while Russia was dealing with the aftermath of the Crimean War, nationalism was reshaping the map of Europe, especially in Italy and Germany. We have some sources on Cavour and Bismarck, the guys who orchestrated the unification of their countries.
Cavour, he was the brains behind Piedmont Sardinia. He knew Italy couldn't unify on its own. They needed a powerful ally, and he found one in Napoleon III of France.
So he played the diplomacy game, leveraging international relations to get what he wanted.
Exactly. He played on Napoleon III's ambitions and basically maneuvered him into a position where France had no choice but to support the Italian cause.
Like a high-stakes game of chess, moving all the pieces into place.
But military force played a role too, of course. That's where Garibaldi and his red shirts come in.
Right, Garibaldi, the legendary figure.
He brought southern Italy into the mix through these daring military campaigns. He was a charismatic leader, embodying that romantic nationalism.
So it was Cavour's political maneuvering combined with Garibaldi's military action that finally created a unified Italy in 1861.
Pretty incredible, considering Italy had been divided for centuries.
And you have Bismarck over in Germany, another master strategist, but his methods were a bit more, shall we say, aggressive.
Oh, Bismarck was all about realpolitik. It's all about pragmatic power, forget ethics. He famously said the big questions of the day wouldn't be decided by speeches and votes, but by blood and iron.
Sounds like a man who got things done, one way or another.
He was strategic and ruthless. He orchestrated 3 wars against Denmark, Austria, and then France, each one designed to weaken his rivals and boost Prussia's position in the German Confederation.
So he was playing the long game. Each war was a step toward a unified Germany.
He was a master manipulator. Like with France, he actually changed a telegram to make it look like the Prussian king had insulted the French ambassador. That fake outrage made France declare war, a war Prussia was way more prepared for.
Wow, that's bold, risking a major war based on a lie.
And it worked. The Franco-Prussian War in 1870 ended with a Prussian victory, clearing the way for the German Empire under Kaiser Wilhelm I. Bismarck got what he wanted, but it cost a lot of lives.
It makes you think about the price of power, even if it's in the name of unification.
It's true. And Even though Bismarck's actions created a powerful, unified Germany, they also planted seeds of resentment and mistrust that would eventually contribute to the First World War.
So even the most skillful political moves can have unintended consequences that last for generations.
It's a sobering thought, isn't it? That the choices of a few powerful people can shape the destiny of nations, even the whole world.
As we've seen in this deep dive into 19th century Europe, history is rarely a simple story of good guys and bad guys. It's this complex mix of ambitions, ideals, and struggles of so many different people, all caught up in the currents of their time.
And it's by understanding these complex stories, the triumphs and tragedies, that we can really appreciate the forces that shape the world we live in today.
And as we wrap up our journey through this wild era, I'm struck by how many of the themes we've talked about are still relevant today. The tension between tradition and progress, the rise of nationalism, the fight for social justice.
It shows you the power of history to inform us, to challenge us, and to help us grapple with the complexities of being human.
Yeah, it's wild to think how much those events from the 1800s still affect us today. It's like history isn't just something you read about, it's a living, breathing thing, you know?
It really is. As we wrap up this deep dive into 19th century Europe, it's good to step back and think about the big takeaways. We've seen empires crumble, technology explode, and ideologies clash, all reshaping the continent.
What would you say was the most significant theme of this whole period? What really jumps out at you?
I think it's that constant tension between tradition and progress. I mean, the 19th century was just overflowing with change, right? Industrialization, urbanization, new political ideas.
Right, right.
But all that rapid change made people anxious, even resistant. Like they were wrestling with this world that was constantly in flux.
Trying to keep their balance on shifting ground. The old ways were being challenged, but the future was scary, uncertain.
Exactly. And you see this tension between the old and the new everywhere in 19th century life. Like think about the Luddites, smashing those machines, trying desperately to cling to their traditional way of life.
Well, those conservative figures like Metternich trying to squash liberal and revolutionary ideas to keep the status quo.
Yeah, they were terrified of change, convinced it would lead to chaos and instability. But then on the flip side, you had the liberals and radicals embracing progress and fighting for more individual rights, democratic reforms, and social justice.
It was this huge battle between those clinging to the past and those reaching for the future. And honestly, that same battle is still going on today, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. We're still figuring out how to balance progress with tradition, how to reconcile individual rights with social responsibility, how to make sure everyone benefits from progress, not just a select few.
And that's what makes studying history so important. It helps us see how people in the past tackled these same problems, learn from their successes and failures. It gives us a better understanding of the forces shaping our world even today.
And as we close out this deep dive, I want to leave you with something to think about. Imagine Metternich, the champion of conservatism, looking at the world today. What would he think? Would he see those revolutions and upheavals of the 19th and 20th centuries as preventable tragedies? Or as inevitable steps in societal evolution?
That's a great question. It really makes you think about the relationship between tradition, progress, and how history unfolds.
And there's no easy answer. History is messy, full of contradictions and surprises. But by wrestling with those complexities, we gain these valuable insights that can help us navigate the challenges of our own time.
Thanks for guiding us through this journey through 19th century Europe. It's been a fascinating look at a really pivotal time in history, one that still has a huge impact on us today.
And for everyone listening, I encourage you to keep exploring this fascinating period. Dive deeper into the sources we've talked about, find new perspectives, and never stop learning and growing. Thanks for joining us.